I find that a lot of brokers make mistakes on is that the commercial lease is arguably one of the more one-sided documents in the free world. And these are all business points I'm talking about. It's
Hmm.
just because it's contained in a lease doesn't mean it's legal. Okay, it's legally binding. 15 years remaining on the lease, including the renewal option. That's $6 million. This
Hmm.
nail salon, the key money, wasn't even getting $1 million. So the landlord's seeing $5 million evaporate before its very eyes.
Hi, I'm George Pino, CEO of Commercial Brokers International, and thank you for joining us today. Today, I have a great guest, Larry Haber. So, Larry is a reformed yet long recovered developer and now managing partner of the Commercial Real Estate Department of AGMB Law, as well as a non practicing CPA and a creative leasing reality. So, he has a lot of wealth of information, both from the legal side, the tax side, and also the actual operations side, which I think is probably the most important. He also conducts an ongoing series of conversations in his podcast. He very interesting, actually. If you guys, it's infused with some rock and roll, hip hop, and sports, so it's a lot more interesting than mine. So when you
No.
get a chance, though, do check it out. We'll have links over to him as well. And also, I thought I'd just throw this out there as well. He's an author of a new book that just was released recently called "Enabling Moments: A Negotiator's Playlist." So, um, today I think I want to talk a little bit about, we do a lot of training. Larry has a whole course of training for commercial real estate agents. And one of the issues that I've always ran into, and one of the hardest concepts to really go over to newer agents and explain to them, is how to navigate the legal side of leasing. A lot of newer agents, especially, they want to show that they have value to their clients, so they may step in and they may try and do things, or they may try and save their client $1 by making changes to the lease that the client wants and in concept. Um, I always say that they're practicing law without a license, and I think most states agree with that. And so, what do you see as some of the most common mistakes that a commercial real estate agent makes? Um, Initially when it comes to one negotiating the lease or talking about the lease itself.
Well, just taking a step back, first and foremost, thank you for having me on and thank you for the kind words. I do appreciate that. And one of the things that you mentioned is value, adding value. So you want to be able to do that. And I have a few theories, and one of them is called, as crazy as this may sound, the Albert Einstein, Snoop Dogg, Drake, Lionel Richie Brickhouse of knowledge theory. And that theory goes in so many words. Try not to be what Albert said. Try not to be a man, or 21st century version, a woman of success. Rather be a man or woman of value. And Snoop Dogg actually, believes in that theory, so to speak, because he said something along the lines of, it doesn't matter if you're flipping hamburgers at McDonald's, be the best hamburger flipper in the world there is. No matter what you do, master your craft. And Drake, although you might not know this, in another bizarro world, was a real estate professor. And if he was here
Know
instead of
that.
me,
Yeah.
he would be telling you, listen, you have to build a foundation of knowledge. You have to know the nuts and bolts of what you're doing so you can add value. And if you're going
Mhm.
to add value, well, where would you start? You would start at the bottom. So, and then you build your way up. So, with the mistakes, the thing that I find that a lot of brokers make mistakes on is that the commercial lease is arguably one of the more one-sided documents in the free world. It's pro-landlord. And listen, landlords take on a lot of risks. Listen, all around the country, landlords are giving back keys in certain markets. It's happening heavily in New
Mhm.
York with all of the many of the big owners. So I understand that, and as I said, you said I should say I'm a reformed yet long recovered developer. But the lease itself, although it's this very difficult document for a tenant, bottom line is it's 95% business points. And what are we? We're all business people. So you need to know as a broker the business points, leaving it to the attorneys you need to work hand in
Mhm.
hand. There's an expression in golf, let's ham and egg it. You're a
Mhm.
team. Your job is not to provide the legal, but at the end of the day, listen, no offense to my legal brethren. Some of us think we're splitting an atom or curing cancer, and I'm fairly decent at what I do. I haven't come close to doing either one of those. Okay. But
Yep.
but during the negotiation, you need to be the glue as the broker. You need to back channel, you need to discuss points with the other broker or the owner or whoever it may be. So, because there's a certain perception of what attorneys are. So, but the point is, you need to know what the lease states, what the impact is of an assignment and subletting clause. Okay.
Mhm.
Because, with that, listen, mine, like just knowing that if I'm representing a landlord and you're on the tenant side as a broker, what you should know is that my assignment and subletting clause is 6 to 7 pages of hell. Okay. So you
Mhm.
should know what that means. What's the impact? Who's the nature of your client? Not knowing what your client's game plan is just a major mistake because
Mhm.
so much in the lease. If you were drafting a letter of intent, one of the themes that runs through it is exit strategies. Okay, so if it's a retail lease, what's the use? What's the assignment and subletting clause?
Mhm.
What is the renewal option provision state? Is there some form of a personal guarantee, a limited guarantee, or in what's prevalent in New York, something called the good guy guarantee? And it's all about the exit strategy. If you're channeling the class, should I stay or should I go? You need to be able to advise your client about that. So it's very important. And it all starts at the letter of intent stage. So
Mhm.
not focusing as much on the letter of intent is a major mistake that I find to be very commonplace.
Yeah. I would agree with you. I've seen some letter of intents that have come across my desk that are, less than a page, in detail. And I'm like, I look at it and I'm like, well, you're barely covering hardly any of the business points. So when I'm responding back on the landlord side, I'm putting 100% in the landlord's favor and just assuming, hey, you never addressed this in your LOI, so this is the way we're going.
Oh yeah, you're giving carte blanche to the landlord's attorney to basically sit there, and go hog wild as far as what to put in the lease. The art of being, listen, from the letter of intent standpoint, yes, it's a non-binding document. That we all know, but at the same time, you need to set the playing field if you're
Yep.
on the tenant side. If you're on the landlord side, narrow, brief, to the point. Let's get you into the lease negotiation
Mhm.
stage when you have less leverage. Deal isn't done, of course, until it's signed, but you've gotten maybe financially pregnant with hiring an architect, an attorney, etc. The space you may
Mhm.
have liked that was in the running is no longer available. You have a holdover clause in your existing space, so you need to get out. But on the tenant side, the true art involved in preparing a letter of intent. How do you prepare a 25-page letter of intent that's only 2 to 3, 4 pages?
Yeah.
Okay. And tee it up for the attorney. Okay.
Mhm.
So, like just for example, my lease as to a renewal option essentially states in so many words, it's personal to the tenant. On a retail, that's not good because the longer the term,
No.
the more
Yep.
valuable when you're assigning it. It states if you have to have been timely in your rent payments. No, you can never have been in default. No, those are things. So you have to have
Yeah.
just very brief sentences in your LOI. You don't want to be negotiating the assignment and subletting clause, but it's all about the strategy. The exit strategy. As a tenant rep, it should have just basic. Not to be too boring here, but it should state first, landlord won't unreasonably withhold, condition, or delay its consent. You need carve outs if you are
Mhm.
selling your business or your assets. You need carve outs for whether it's going to be merger, it's going to be an acquisition, etc. And you may want to do a permitted occupant
Yep.
language where if I'm a Baskin Robbins, I could bring in, as a complimentary use in there. Or if it's an office use, I could license out 1/3 without the landlord's consent. There's all those little things that are there. And by the way, all these things I just rambled about on the assignment and
Mhm.
subletting clause is I have it in 3 sentences. So it's
Yeah.
only maybe, it's maybe a 20% of a page.
Yeah.
You do that, going back to adding value. It's like your client's going to say, you got game.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree with you 100%. And my when I do all my LOIs or when I train for LOIs with the client with my agents, I always explain to them that get the concept out as detailed as possible, but don't negotiate the actual language necessarily. Let that attorneys do that, but at least outline the concepts that you're going. And we have set items that we're going, but we also have and we tend to be very aggressive if we're doing a tenant rep side
Yes.
on the initial ask. And we're asking for quite a few things, but a lot of it is just seeing how they're responding to see about how is this going to be an issue down the road, or what are we going to have to do, or do we even want to go forward if this is a too onerous of a guarantee that they're requesting, or whatever the case may be. Now, what you had mentioned the assignment and subletting clause, and I think that's one that's extremely important as well, because a lot of times, the tenants don't think they're going to fail.
Yes.
Attorneys,
Yeah, we
however,
all
are
wear rose-colored glasses, or we should to some extent, but they need to be
yeah.
tainted with something called reality, George.
Reality, but then also, life happens and they may just want
Yes.
to get out. They may be doing well, but they have to get out, sign it, sublet, whatever the case may be. So we're always looking for, this may not happen, but let's, in case it does, let's cover yourself, which is why when I explain leases for newer people, it's like, well, this is why you have leases that are 30 to 150, 200 pages long. We're not talking about what's happening today. We're talking about what's happening during the life of the lease and what may happen and how we're going to negotiate or work around those issues. And so on the assignment and subletting clause, I think that's one of the most important clauses to look at, especially like if you do assign or if you assign the lease, you want to make sure you're not giving up your rights to talk to the landlord in case that the person that you assign it to does not, all little clauses and things that we can go into. But what are some of the other provisions of a lease that you feel are important but often overlooked? Do you think?
Well, listen, to me, the use clause is very important. And I could give you an example as to why the use clause, the assignment and subletting clause, the renewal option, if there is a guarantee, the compliance with law section. There are landlords across the country who will say that, if I have to spend money on the building to comply with law, whether present or future,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you have to pay your proportionate share. And if they're nice, I'm saying that with a wink, they'll say, amortized as reasonably determined by landlord. So, which will never be more than 10 years. Forget that it should be gap, could be 27 to 39 years. Okay, which means essentially you're paying for it. So if you have 10% of the building and the improvement was $1 million to comply with law, guess what? Okay, you're paying $100,000 over 10 years. You never want your client, and I don't like to use the word never, but regardless of what side of the table you're on, you never want to spend their money and you don't want them to sign a blank check. So, and once again, like just having 1 or 2 sentences in the LOI, once again, the art, how do you turn 25 pages of an LOI into really just 3 to 4 pages?
Mm-hmm.
Concise and to the point. So listen, I got a call years ago and I'm flipping all the things and all these lessons that you learn along the way, I'm flipping on the other side. I got a call from a landlord and the landlord said, listen, I think I have a problem. And I'm like, what's the problem? Because I entered into a lease for retail when it was $50 a square foot on Bedford Avenue in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Now the market's 250. And and now they want to assign, let's just call it a nail salon. And let's just say they wanted to assign it to Lululemon. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, so what's the problem? He goes, well, it was a 15-year lease with 2 5-year options. We're 5 years in, and um, I used the standard form, but it wasn't well prepared by my attorney. And I said, what's the issue? I said, did you use the standard boilerplate form that's recognized in New York? They said, yes. And I said, oh, the use clause, what's it say in Article 2? Because it states it should be used for a nail salon and no other purpose. And it said, no, it actually says any lawful use. And I'm already like, oh my God, which means the tenant attorney and the tenant broker should have a parade thrown for them down the Canyon of Heroes.
We
'Cause
always ask for that. We never get it.
yeah, so now, because if it said a nail salon only, technically speaking, this is the interaction of all the clauses, and these are all business points I'm talking about. It's just
Mhm.
just because it's contained in a lease doesn't mean it's legal. Okay, it's legally binding. But if it had said nail salon only, technically speaking, as a landlord, I could withhold my consent to an assignment to Lululemon in this little hypothetical for the very reason is that it said nail salon only. If I'm a landlord, I'm a control freak. The idea being, if anyone's going to make profit on a space, it's me as
Good for
landlord.
you.
You tenant are renting out the space for to conduct a business,
For
to
your
make
business.
profit, to,
Mhm.
to pay me
Yeah.
rent. That's a
Not to
landlord's
arbitrage the
mindset.
rents if they go up.
Oh, yeah. And to be clear, I probably represent now these days, the last 10, 15 years, I'm probably two-thirds tenants, maybe even more than that.
Mhm.
So there's that. So I said, okay, do you have, what about your assignment and subletting clause? Because there's a little small one in the pre-printed form. He goes, yeah, there's the one in the pre-printed form. I go, does it say see rider? And he said, yes. I go, great. Is the rider 6 pages of hell like mine? Or is it, what is it? He goes, oh, it's only like a third of the page. I said, oh, so there's no recapture, there's no profit sharing, there's no restrictions. And immediately I know there's a problem. And I go, renewal option? Is it personal to the tenant or is it anyone and anybody can exercise? Yes, it was the latter. And then last I go, is there a guarantee? And he goes, yeah, there is a guarantee. And I'm like, great. Does it have these few magical words? Yes. But the point, what was at stake, and this is why it's so important, the rent under the lease was 100,000 a year. Because of the jump from $50 a square foot to 250 a square foot, this
Mhm.
$200 a square foot delta, that's 500,000 a year.
Awesome.
It was a 400,000 a year delta with 15 years remaining on the lease, including the renewal option. That's $6 million. This
Mhm.
nail salon, the key money wasn't even getting $1 million. So the landlord's seeing $5 million evaporate before its very eyes. And
Mhm.
that's the stakes that are involved. How it was resolved, I said, because there was the guarantee, I go, does it have the standard language that states that this guarantee shall be binding for any renewal, assignment, etc.? He said, yes. I'm like, bingo. I go, does it have an exit strategy? And exit strategies permeate throughout. He goes, no. I said, great. So listen, you're not going to get this $5 million back. You have to consent, but what you need to do is call up the tenant and say, listen, I messed up. I have to consent to this, but by the way, for the next 15 years, you're on the hook personally. Have a good day. As a consequence of that, you're going to be able to claw something back, kill one of the renewal options, get
Mhm.
more secure. You'll be able to negotiate. you
Split
know
the profits, whatever it may be.
Exactly. Get something for your troubles. But the point is, all these lessons you talk about that are negative, the tenant when they were negotiating the lease was positive. The tenant broker and the tenant attorney were thinking ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Always think ahead, know what can happen down the road, you know.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the bigger mistakes that a lot of agents make when it comes to advising the tenant is they're looking at the here and now versus down the road. What are the aspects that can, happen with the lease? What are, if this happens, what are you going to do with this? If this happens, what are you going to do with this? How are you actually planning everything? Your exit strategy, what's going to happen? What are you going to do? What are some of the other, common mistakes that you see an agent when advising a client when negotiating a lease makes?
Well, part of it is, there's the lost art of listening. Okay, and that is listening. If you're actually having a sit down negotiation, listen, and I didn't do this when I was in my 20s and my 30s. Okay. Once I start talking, if you haven't picked up on it, I don't stop. So I realize at a certain point, you go into the room, you need to take the temperature of who is in the room, so to speak. So I try, it doesn't always work because, the nature of what my role is, but I try to be the last person to speak. So I can take the pulse of everyone in the room and then I can talk. So
Mhm.
that's very important. Learning how to, for no nicer way of putting it, to shut up sometimes. Okay. And if you don't know the answer, which is really important, know at least enough to say, I don't know, but at the same time, I have the ability to find out. I'll get back to you later on or tomorrow. Okay. So part of the mistake is a lot of brokers don't have on speed dial a resource of attorneys, contractors, and architects. Like brokers to me, they feed me a lot of business because I made myself a resource to them.
Mhm.
I'm here. I'm not charging for a 10-minute, 20-minute phone call if a broker has a question. Okay, because the bottom line is it's going to pay off. I may look like I'm 19, but I'm 65, but I conduct my business like I'm still a kid and I'm going to be doing
Yep.
this forever. So you need to have that long-term vision. But, brokers are sources of referrals to contractors, to architects, to contractors. And the short is you need to have that. When I used to own, I'm pretty good at property management and construction management, but sometimes you could say a little knowledge is dangerous. But when I had my director of property management and construction management on my side, I was no longer a can of too short of a full six pack. I was now formidable. Okay. You
Yep.
need to have, that, the ability, of having, resources. And that is so important. I find that, it happens too often. To just say something for the sake of saying something is not the way to go. And that's why, once again, knowing your business. Listen,
Mhm.
there is a difference between being a retail and an office broker, an industrial, and I don't like to generalize. You probably need to know more as a retail broker about infrastructure as far as an HVAC. How many ton units do you need for an 8,000 square foot place? There's a little nuances there because over, simplifying it, many times a landlord on an office lease is building out the space for you. And it's turnkey, but you still need to know about the work letter. You have to become educated. Listen, now, I'm using a line, a title of a song, I should say, by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Knowledge is the power of equality. Okay,
Okay.
you need to have knowledge. And listen, I look at brokers as being, not just because it's, who we're speaking to, but they're the greatest things since sliced bread, as long as they're goal line to goal line. Okay,
Mhm.
the mistake,
Yeah.
part of the
No, I
mistake
understand.
is
No, I understand exactly what you mean. And actually, what you're saying about the vendors and working, how I've always explained it to new agents getting into the business is one of the first steps you need to do is create your wheel. And your wheel, you're the hub. Your vendors are all the spokes. And
exactly.
you can't move without your vendors. But more importantly, your vendors should be people that you work with and have such a good relationship with that if there's a problem, they should be reaching out to you first and also the client. But this way you're fully informed. So because you're speaking to different vendors or different aspects, whether it's the title, the escrow, the attorneys, the other broker, the contractors, you're speaking to all of them. So you understand that there may be something that one party's doing and another's not, and you can really help organize and get that done. So I always say, create your wheel, get your vendors as your spokes, have multiple vendors that you can refer out to but at least have it so that these are people that you trust, that you're going to work with, and they're
Exactly.
your secondary eyes and ears as well.
Yeah, listen, you have to build relationships. Listen, this is a tough business to break into. If you survive the first few years, yeah, you're going to survive, but it's like it's getting there. And, pursuing a multitude of parallel paths, how you market yourself is so important. If
Mhm.
anyone wants to follow me on Instagram, Leasing Reality, I have all these videos that one talks about using 50 songs by Eminem, why you shouldn't be afraid to have a social media presence in business. or it's all about the networking with using Lizzo. It's all about the excuse me. You know,
Mhm.
building those relationships is important. If you sit there and not to get too deep, if you if you channeled Yeats from back in the day, the great poet, he said something along the lines of, "There's no strangers here. It's just friends who haven't met." Okay, so if you're at a networking event, it's like, the art is how to sell without selling. Okay, but you need to put yourself out there, and so you can create these relationships, so you have the resources to rely upon. So it's so it's like you're formidable. And listen, the good news is, because of what's happened over the last 15 years or so with social media and the internet, even going back even before that, it enables you to become very knowledgeable. You can
Mhm.
make an argument that back in the days when I was learning the business in the late 80s, early 90s, it was tougher. More opportunity in a sense, because there was less people who were, if you had a work ethic and you were nice, it made it easier back in the day.
Well, back then we didn't. I'm also a child of the mid late '80s when I first started my
Yes.
career right out of college.
Yeah.
We didn't have a lot of the tools that the agents have nowadays, so we had to do it the old school methodology, and it was a lot
Yeah.
of hard work. But I still remember to this day when a manager came to me at my first or second job out of college and said, "Have you heard about this internet thing? It's going to be big." And
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you know what? They were right.
yeah, they were
No,
right.
listen, when the calculus for me changed, when I used to, we owned about 4 million plus square feet of property, and we did well in New York. And I could say that without sounding like a jerk, because Newark, New Jersey, is a nasty four-letter word to me, at least as it relates to our holdings there. And I had to come back to the service side in 2009. And at that point in place in time, context-wise, LinkedIn and Twitter existed, but no one really knew they did. Facebook
Yeah.
was personal. YouTube was funny videos. I created a YouTube channel at
Mhm.
49, looking like I do, and I was very transparent. And people thought I was out of my mind. They were
Oh yeah.
asked they were asking me if I was trying to commit career suicide or if I smoked crack for breakfast. And they thought it was so outside the box, and I was like, "There is a box." I didn't even know. But the end of the day, because I was true to myself and I came at it with my shtick, so to speak. Part of it is, if you notice, I use a few music lines. It worked and it caught on. And listen, you're not going to be everyone's flavor, but you hope, but you know as long as you're true to yourself and you're a good person and you add value and you
Yep.
show the work ethic. But it's, the bottom line is, it's, you got to put yourself out there as a broker a little bit.
Yeah.
And the art, once again, is how are you a giver and not a taker when you're selling, so that you're not perceived as selling.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think the giving mentality, I think, pays back more so than if you're a taker. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen that happen over and over. There's and we can go into it. There, some of the top brokers I've known that do a tremendous amount of business. They're probably the most giving of their time, especially to newer agents. And
It pays back.
and
Look,
it's
you should
how
be
they
a
built their
mentor.
business.
Yeah, because you don't know. Because listen, you're also creating, a whole legion of minions, so to speak. You
Yeah.
know, is what it comes down to. And listen, you do it from the heart. You do it for the right reasons. And if good comes from it, as far as some referrals, wonderful. If it
Yeah.
doesn't, you can put your head on the pillow at night. Know you did the right thing.
Absolutely. And speaking of doing the right thing, that's actually Pono. It's a Hawaiian word for doing the right thing.
Oh, really?
So,
So you're like Spike Lee, do the right thing. That movie from the 80s.
yeah, I remember now, we can go into a lot of those old movies and songs,
Yes.
but yeah. So, this has been very informative, Larry, and I want to say thank you so much for being on. I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you're a busy person. Would love to have you again, maybe go over some other details on another follow-up interview, but also for all of you that have interest in Larry's courses or his book that just came out, his contact information is below here. And so there you go, Enabling Moments by Larry Haber, and you got a hell of a photographer for that cover,
Yes.
Larry.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, just a shameless plug for that. It's Business life and negotiating mindsets and mantras. Short stories from the early 60s through the present day. But for those, you may learn more about music than real estate and negotiating. Yeah, yeah. But song titles are not copyright protected. I use the song titles of 300 artists, 1,200 songs to help tell the stories and the lessons of the moment. So it's a fun book. You
I
know,
think that actually, I think that'd be a fantastic book. I mean, I'd love, like one of my social media posts and things I do, I always hide like different songs or things in there as a teaser, and
yeah.
I'll pick certain songs. Like we had one of my agents had a property on Hollywood Boulevard, so I didn't want to necessarily give the location away, but to promote it out, I chose the star that was out front. It was a singer, put their song up there and be background, said guess the location and we'll get you through and whatever. So, little fun stuff like that. I love because it does create that interaction. Songs to me are one of those memory points, where you hear a lyric or a tune and you're like, it brings back the fond memories of when you first heard it back when you were a child or
Oh, there's
doing
no question. It's it's
stuff.
a it's a great equalizer.
Yeah.
The music brings a lot of people together. And
Well,
initially,
it
when I
definitely call him the Savage Beast here. So,
yeah, I
all right, so thank you
appre-
so much. And I look forward to continuing this.
okay, absolutely, George. I appreciate the opportunity and be well, everyone. Okay, take care.